Hi there and welcome to this video. It's all about how to put together the advent panels that are available from Sewing Street. If you want to order them, I'll pop the details in the comments below. Right, let's get going. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is prepare the fabric to create the back of the pockets. And I've got a few things here that are going to help me. Now, in the instructions, it will tell you to cut your pocket backing to 9 inches by 23 inches. Dependent on the actual width of your fabric, it depends on whether you can fit in that full 23 inches. I've used a metre worth of Rose and Hubble as the backing, and I've been left with this kind of quantity over. So I've kind of been a little bit frugal because I've gone right up to the selvage with my cut, and it is just shy. It's about 22.5 inches, so it's not quite the full width, but it's going to be trimmed down. Once we've quilted the lines in it, it's going to be trimmed down to 8 inches by 21 inches anyway. So that's why I'm not worried too much about using the selvage and the fact that it is just that little bit too short to the instructions. But if you can fit in the full 23, then you can do. The wadding, you can see I've not cut that precisely to the same size. So again, because we're trimming it down, I'm not going to worry too much. You could use something like H640 if you're wanting to for that. You could be using some sort of foam if you wanted to. It's entirely up to you. It's a wall hanging in effect. So whatever your preferred choice is. And then because we are going to be quilting these layers together, you're going to need some sort of a backing to support the stitches as you're quilting. So I've got just some cutaway stabilizer, in fact, which I'm using to support the stitches. Could be that you're using a muslin. It could be that you've got some sort of, I don't know, an old duvet fabric from like a kind of like a white or a light tone or something like that. Nothing patterned because you don't want that showing through. But the actual advent calendar is going to be lined on the back as well, so you won't really see it, but it just needs to be something light, relatively light. I know it's cut away. We're not going to be cutting it away. Predominantly you would use this when you're working with embroidery and you'd embroider a design and you'd cut away the excess. So obviously the centerpiece would stay within your embroidery on the backing, and then you cut away the excess. But on this occasion, I'm just going to leave it inside because it doesn't really matter. So get that out of the way. That's a Madeira one to start with, but there's loads of different brands out there. I'm also going to use a spray adhesive, temporary spray adhesive, to put all the layers together. If you've got your own preferred choice, by all means do so, but make sure if you are using a spray, it is one that's deemed usable for fabrics, because you don't want to be using anything that's kind of like crafty. So I've got my pieces, so I'm just going to move that out of the way to start with. When you come to using a spray adhesive, you always spray the wadding, not the fabric. So all I'm going to do is give that a reasonable spray, because you want to make sure that it does all stick together. Obviously make sure if you are using a spray adhesive, you've got a well ventilated room that you're working with. And then all I'm going to do is, this one's actually 12 inches wide, which is brilliant because it's just the right size to actually roll across my wadding. Then I'm just going to come in with my rotary cutter, trim that edge off like so. That's used for another day. And then I'm just going to flip that over and repeat the process, this time using the fabric. So again, spray your wadding. Don't take your spray too high, otherwise you'll end up spraying it all over the surface here. You can lay something down to protect your surface. I know I haven't done it on this occasion, but keeping it quite close. And it is only a temporary spray, so I don't tend to find I have an issue with overspray of that one or sticking to my mat or anything like that. Always work from the centre outwards. So keep it as smooth as you possibly can as you go. And then do that with all 6 of those kind of pocket backs. Next thing you need is a heat erasable pen. And then you need something like to create a straight line. So it could be a quilting, sorry, walking away there. Could be a quilt ruler that you're using. And all you're going to do is find the halfway point. So you could just fold it in half if you wanted to. Gives you a rough idea where that is. But you just need to make sure that it is at right angles to the edge of your fabric. So lining up your points, you're just going to create a line. Heat erasable pen, air erasable pen, if you're wanting to, tailor's chalk, however you want to create it. You might be just pressing a line in it if you're wanting to, it's up to you. And then all I'm going to do is take this over to the sewing machine, stitch along that line, and then create stitches parallel to that original line, going out to the right, going out to the left, and stitch them about 1/2 inch apart. It doesn't have to be a scientific measurement, just make sure that they are straight. And to prevent any kind of bananaing or bending of the fabrics, what I tend to do is I will stitch from the top down to the bottom on one side, from the top down to the bottom on the other side, and then I would rotate my fabrics and then do it the same. So each pair that you do, rotate your fabric, and then that way you tend to find that you don't kind of veer off on a diagonal as you sew. So I'm going to go off and do that, and I'll be back with you when I've done all the quilting. Now I've set my machine up with an adjustment of 1/2 inch for the stitches, so the stitch positioning. Set it in my favourites, so all I've got to do is work my way between the two of them, and one will be 1/2 inch to the left of that line that I've just drawn, and the other one is 1/2 inch to the right of it. So it makes it nice and easy for you to kind of toggle between the two as you're sewing. So I've already stitched down the centre one there, I've done down the left, so I'm just going to do down the right and then continue that throughout. So there you go, so we go down that side. And I'm just lining up the edge of my foot with that original stitch line to get that 1/2 inch change. So now I'm going to rotate my fabric 180 degrees. So I'm just going to turn it around like so, and then I'm going to carry on sewing. So I'm going to do again another row this side and then another row that side. So I'll work my way from the center outwards, and because I'm doing that, we should minimize the actual bending of the fabric piece when it comes to the quilting lines. What you might want to do is use one of these little devices if you have one for your sewing machine, and the idea being that will sit in each of the rows of stitches, so then you can actually use that to create parallel lines instead if you're wanting to. But I tend to use that preset that I've put in there because it just makes it a little bit easier and a little bit quicker in my opinion. Okay, so you can see we've got all of the parallel lines there, and as I say, we are going to trim this down, so don't worry about the lining up of the edges or anything like that. Sometimes it's easier to create something larger and then trim it back when it comes to quilting, because you never know how the fabric is going to behave with your different layers. Machines are very much individuals when it comes to how accurate they are with regards to the kind of spacing. So as long as you've got something that looks roughly like this, or it might be that you want to do a bit of free motion and kind of do a stipple effect, it's entirely up to you. It's your project, so you decide. So the next thing that we need to do is trim this down to the correct size now. So obviously originally it was 9 inches by 23 inches. So we're actually going to trim it down so it's 8 inches by 21 now. So keep your lines parallel, or your cut lines parallel to the actual quilting lines. And the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of straighten off one of those edges. I know it's 9 inches wide, so I've kind of got a little bit of a leeway, but I'm going to take it roughly to the edge and kind of keep the straight line. Don't worry about the edge because it might have kind of deviated as you've been sewing. So just bring it in, and I'm lining up my straight edges with the actual stitches. Now again, the stitches may have veered off a little bit. We're not looking at something scientific with this, so if it does go awry a little bit, then yeah, it's nothing too much to worry about. But I'm literally just taking off that edge there, so I'm just holding on, cutting through, nice sharp rotary cutter, and taking that edge away like so. So then all I need to do is measure in my 8 inches from, oops, sorry, knocking the camera, that's not a good thing. Measure in my 8 inches from the edge. Obviously it depends on how you're doing this with regards to what you've got, the different quilting rulers that you might be using, things like that. But just make a couple of little marks. So now it's 8 inches, so I'm just going to put a couple of little marks with a heat erasable pen. Do that further down as well, and then I can line those up, and that's going to give me my 8-inch width piece of fabric. Again, as you're lining up those lines, try and line them up, and at the same time, with a little bit of luck and a wing and a prayer, you will find that it is the parallel lines still continue as well. So just line up to get your 8 inches. Obviously put more lines in if you're wanting to with regards to that, and then again all I'm going to do is measure it again, because once you actually cut this down, it is a case of that you can't kind of, well, you can stitch it back together if you need to, but again, just double check. So we've got 8 inches there, we've got 8 inches there, so I'm happy now that that line is going to be measuring 8 inches, and all I'm going to do is line up my ruler there, hold it firmly, again take my rotary cutter and then cut along like so. So there we go. So that now is 8 inches wide. So I just need to make sure that the length of that is now 21 inches. You can start and stop at whatever point you like, but I tend to try and find the halfway point roughly. There's going to be a lot of kind of movement when you are working across 6 different pockets. So I'm just going to put a little mark there so as I know that that is my center point there. And then if it's 21 inches, it's going to be 10.5 inches either side of there. So again, you can bring in your quilting ruler there, and you can see my 10.5 inches mark is just bringing me inside of that selvage edge. If I'm a little bit nervous about that, then I can nudge it over and then just make sure that you've got your 21 inches on the other side, which that isn't there. So yeah, it's up to you. You're not going to, well, you might be quite precise when you're actually lining everything up, but you are going to lose a little bit in the side seams as well. So we'll leave it as that, and then all I'm going to do is line up from here and take it, well, what I'm going to do is mark it. So yeah, we've got our 10.5 inches there, so that's at 10.5 inches there, so that is going to be my cut point on this side. Hopefully you can see that. And then I've got my 21 inches, which is on that side there. If you want to go slightly outside, you can do. Having a little bit of extra there isn't going to be a major issue, because you're lining lots and things up. So it might be that you just want to take it that extra little bit further, just to make sure that you have got a little bit of kind of give and take. But it's entirely up to you. But once you've decided it's going to be 21 inches, then we're going to trim it off at the edge there, and I'm just going to rotate that round there, and I've got my bottom line there, so I'm going to take that to my 21 inches on that side, lining up again with my straight edge, and then cut like so. There we go. Get rid of that waste. So you repeat that, so you've got 6 of those pieces, and they are going to form the backs to your pockets. Okay, so once you've actually cut out all of your panel pieces, the instructions will tell you to cut out your pocket linings. So your pocket linings will be the same width but slightly wider, so slightly deeper, as you can see there. Now the idea being is you will take your panel piece, you will turn it over, and right sides facing, you'll line up that top edge like so, pin or clip it in place, and then sew a centimetre in from the edge there. And you'll do that on all 6 pieces. So I'm going to go off and do that now. Okay, So I've done that, and you'll be able to see probably on the flip side better where I've done that seam. So we're going to open up the seam, holding it back, and then get the iron and press that seam open. So the actual seam bit there, I'm going to push that to the back, so the pocket lining. So just give it a little press, turn it over and do it from the opposite side if you wanting to, and then just press that open. And then flip it over and just make sure that it's nice open seam. So I've taken a moment to do that, get everything all neat and tidy, ready for the next step. Okay, so the next step is we're going to bring that raw edge and the raw edge of your lining together. So they're going to come down like so, and that's going to create that little kind of pocket edge that you can see. Now these raw edges are going to get caught up when we put the pocket back in place. So just give that a little press like so to get that nice and flat, and just make sure that it's all lined up at the bottom. You've got a nice kind of balanced look to it. If you've got any bits left over, then you can trim those off. So just take a pair of scissors or a rotary cutter, whichever you choose, and just take those little bits off. Like so. Okay, then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on each of these picture pieces. So what's going to happen is you're going to fold along the edge, so keeping the little tiny border on the side of the fold, because what's going to happen is you're going to stitch each one of these from the top right the way down to the bottom edge. Now the idea being is you are going to catch the lining in at the same point, so you need to make sure that it's all held together. Now if you want, you can use little quilt clips or you can use pins, and then what I'm going to suggest is you stitch a minimum of 3 millimeters in. Can be a little bit more, quarter of an inch maybe, just to make sure that you're kind of stitching through all those layers that you've got there. So I'm going to go off and do that, and I'll be back with you in just a second. Okay, so hopefully you'll be able to see that stitched along that edge, so that will create the edge of that pocket there, and I just need to do that on the other side of that pocket, and then all the subsequent panels. So you'll have 24 of those to stitch in total on your 6 long pieces. So I'm going to go off and get those all done, and then we can get ready to start putting the pocket backs in place. Okay, so I am back, and you can see I've stitched all of those. Make sure that you're catching in everything there as well with the lining. So next thing is to attach the pocket back, and that's done with the quilted piece of fabric that you've got. So we're going to position these together now. We just need to get a few little marks in place to start with. So the first one that you're going to get is the center mark of your quilted piece. So the quickest way to do that is just to fold it in half. What you'll probably find is that you'll find the halfway point, with a bit of luck, will have a stitch line. If it hasn't, it's not the end of the world. So just going to put that as a mark for the center point, like so. Then you can follow the instructions from the pattern and place your other marks either side of it. So because you've got 1/2 inch increments, what you should find is that it'll line up perfectly. So just follow the instructions. If it's a little bit off then don't worry, it's not the end of the world. So the idea being is that those points that you've created there are going to line up with the centres of these panels. So again, I'm not going to measure it. If you want to, you can draw a line to actually show where the centre is, if that's going to make it easier for you to actually sew, or you can just kind of go with the flow when you actually get to the sewing machine. Depends how confident you are. So the first thing we can do is take that centre line, the panel, and line that up. So you've got the raw edge lining up, and you're kind of lining up with your line. Now if your stitches are nice and straight, then you will find that it's going to line up with that stitch line going from the bottom right to the top. But yeah, don't worry too much if it isn't. And then just going to put a couple of pins in place, top and bottom, just to hold it in situ when we come to sew. Again, we're going to look for the centre point on the left and the right hand pieces that you've got here. So just again, roughly place it where the halfway mark is and take it up to the top. And if you want to, again, you can just put a little mark so as you know exactly where you're aiming to sew, and then pin that top and bottom again. And then again over on this side as well. So again, roughly where you're going to, and then lining up with that stitch line, top and bottom, like so. And that should be enough to keep the fabric in place while you need to sew those lines. Now the edges of the pockets will get caught in when you come to put the backing on, but we're not going to be doing that for a little while yet. So what you can do is just pin those in place, lining up the raw edge, and then kind of tack it or stitch it. I don't alter the stitch length, I just stitch with the same 2.5. Just make sure that it's within a centimetre of that raw edge. So when you come to do your seam and you're putting your backing on, when you sew a centimetre in, it'll catch. So just kind of stitch it just enough to catch the layer, so about half a centimetre, something like that, and do that on both edges. But again, line up the bottom, line up the raw edges, and you can do that with all 6 of your panels, and then we'll start putting those panels together to catch in those bottom edges in just a little minute. So I'm going to go and sew those up now. Okay, so I am back with the panel. So next thing that we need to do is flatten out these pockets. So I'm just going to basically put them down like so, and where you've got the side pieces, you're just going to kind of fold them so as the centre part of the pocket is folding flat. Now as long as there's a little bit of give there, that will be okay. And I'm just going to pin these in place, and the bottoms will catch. The aim of the game here is to make sure that the pocket bottoms all line up with that bottom edge, and they're nice and flat in the process. And these pins are going to kind of keep those pieces from kind of pulling in. Now you might find that the fold line will line up with your stitches, you might find that it doesn't. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Obviously in the perfect world, this line will all line up as well, but once it's hanging up and it's full of sweeties or treats, you really won't notice. And of course the thickness of the pockets will vary, because presumably they'll all have something different in them anyway. So all you can do with each one of those is make sure that it's flat, and we will catch that bottom edge in when we come to attach the next panel. So you work your way through all of them, popping the pins in place, folding them flat. You just need to make sure that the end one, which I'm doing at the moment, that raw edge, not the raw edge, sorry, that fold doesn't get caught up in the raw edge, because don't forget you're still going to have that 1 centimetre seam allowance later on. So just make sure that that still is sitting within there, so you've still got, when the stitch line comes through, it's not going to catch that fold. It's a bit tight on this one, but this is just a prototype, so you should have a bit more space on yours. So all I'm going to do is leave that. I'm going to go and do the other one, and then we'll put the two together in a second. Okay, so now I've got my 2 panels. Obviously you will have 6, but I'm just working on the 2 to show you. And the idea being is that they'll join together like so. So you basically line them up, and what you need to make sure is that the bottom of one row meets with the top of the next. Now these can go in whatever order you like. You totally decide on which order you want them to be in, but basically what you're going to do is you're going to take that first one and flip it over, so as the bottom of the pockets meet up with one of the quilted edges. So that needs to happen for all of them, and then what will happen is you'll stitch them together and you'll see they'll join like so. So again, just put them right sides together. Now it's up to you, you can pin or clip. Just literally just clip it together if you're going to use the clips. Obviously you've got your pins in place there, so just be careful as you are sewing. If you want, you can put your clips there and then remove the pins that are underneath. You just want to make sure that you don't kind of catch in the edges of the pockets so as they fold in, but if they do, it's not the end of the world. So you might want to just put like a clip on where the pins are, like so, and then just remove them from inside, and then that way you know you're not going to do any damage to your machine. Okay. And then as you work your way along, 1 centimetre in again as you're working your way along, and then we'll press and fold that back, and you'll do that with all 3 pairs. And then obviously you join them together so you'll have all 6 of them in a run. So I'm going to go and do that next. Ta-da! So here we go. So we've got all 6 panels now joined together. So you can see there on the top, going down to the bottom. The bottom panel still got pins in, because that edge will get caught up when we put the backing on, which will be in a little while. But before we put the backing on, we have got to add a couple of kind of channels, one at the top, one at the bottom, for the rods to go in place, the bamboo rods, like these. And these are going to be the hanging rods, so one will sit at the top, one will sit at the bottom. And the top one will have some cord or ribbon or whatever you choose to actually hang it from. So incidentally, these can be whatever thickness you like. I think these are 9mm with regards to the dowel, and then you've got the dowel ends. I just bought these off the Big River website or app. And these, they were slightly too small for the dowel, so David, bless him, did drill them out a little bit, and then there's a bit of glue in there as well to keep those intact. Just make sure that you kind of it all fits together when you go for it. And these have been cut to, I think it's about 60 centimetres, so we've managed to get 4 out of 1 run from our local DIY store. So yeah, and I think it was about a £5, something like that, for the dowel. And then the actual ends, well, I've got a ton of those. So yeah, for many Christmases to come. So how do we do that? Well, according to your panel, it will tell you the size of the fabric that you need to cut for the channels. So you'll need 2 of those. And incidentally, let's talk about the supportive fabric, because obviously you've got the panel that you'll be buying, whether you buy the panel by itself or as part of the kind of like kit. Sewing Street, I know, have included the lighter fabric. So the lighter fabric, there's a metre of that in the kit that they've provided. If you cut it carefully, then you will end up with roughly that amount left, which is probably about 1/4 of a metre that way, something along those lines, maybe a little bit more. Tape measure, probably not a bad idea. So there you go, you've got about just over 30 centimetres, so reasonable amount left. The backs for the pockets, and once you've actually cut out the dowel channels, you've got, again, careful how you cut it, and you should hopefully end up with a reasonable piece left over. So that's again about 25 centimetres, something like that. So These could be used to make little drawstring gift bags potentially. Don't forget you have got on the panel some snowflake fabric as well. This is just kind of a bit of a bonus. So what you can do is actually use this or these or all three of those to make little drawstring bags, and then the drawstring bags could fit in there. So if you want that element of surprise, what you could do is just fill 24 drawstring bags with stuff, mix them up, and then just put them into whichever pocket you feel fit, and then that way you won't know what's in the pockets either. So if you're making it for yourself, you can still have a little bit of a surprise as to what's going to be in there, or whoever fills those little bags for you. So you could make 24 little bags, hand over the bags and say, there you go, fill those with lots of goodies for me, and then we'll put them in the pocket. So yeah, little serving suggestion maybe for you. Also as well, the back panel you could add a little bit of embroidery to if you wanted to, or these top panels, if you wanted to, you could make them wider and actually take them to an embroidery machine and maybe embroider Merry Christmas or the recipient's name if you wanted to. There's all sorts of different things you can play around and make it your own. So the instructions will tell you how wide you need to make these to make them up in the way that I'm making them up. If you want to do your own version, you play around with it, go for it, have fun with it. I'm folding in roughly 1 inch, 2 centimeters there or thereabouts. Doesn't have to be a scientific measurement. I will make sure that they are both the same overall though when we bring them together, because that will drive me crazy if they're not. So I'm just going to fold, oh sorry, don't bash the camera then. Fold them in so as they are the same both sides. So let's bring that in so they're about like so. So similar sort of amount on the end. And this is just because we are going to just stitch these ends in place. So that should be enough there to hold that in place. So that's going to be that one, and that's going to be that one. And all I'm going to do is just going to stitch from the right hand side, stitch to make sure that catch that in, and then what will happen is we'll fold them in half and pin them to the top and the bottom of the panel that we've created. So I'm going to do that and get the iron out of the way before it falls off the table. So yeah, let's go and get that done, and then I'll be back with you in a second. There they are. So I'm going to bring the panel back in, and the top end I'm just going to centralise that piece. Now you'll see it doesn't go right to the ends, and it's not meant to, so don't panic. First of all, just make sure that it kind of is balanced. So find your halfway point of each of them if you're wanting to, and then I'm going to pin that in place. I'm going to pin it in place though just a little bit further down away from that top edge, because that top edge will get caught in when we come to stitch the backing in place. Now if you want, you can just tack it along that raw edge. It's probably not a bad idea if you're not a confident sewer, just so as you make sure that it does catch in. But we're going to be using a centimetre seam allowance when we come to catch that in a little bit later on. So that's going to be the top, and that will fold back to put that channel in the top, and then we're just going to do one at the bottom as well. So again, raw edges, make sure those raw edges line up. Again, it's going to be a little bit narrower. You've got some pins already in place here because of the bottom edge, which obviously will accommodate for when we come to putting the backing on. So what you potentially could do, and I think what I am going to do on this occasion, is actually tack that all together. So just run a row of stitches to make sure that everything's in place, because there's a lot of pins there, and when I take the pins out and use clips, there could be a lot of movement. So by just doing a little row of stitches within that 1 centimetre seam allowance, so about ½ centimetre, so that it's caught inside, and then that means that when we put the backing on there and we put the 1 centimetre seam allowance in place, then everything will get caught up. So I'm just going to go do a little row of stitches with that one, and then we can get ready to put the backing on. Okay, so I decided to actually stitch the top as well. So that's kind of tacked in close to the edge, and that's the top dowel sleeve channel. Don't know what you want to call it. Call it what you will. So your backing, now your backing can be anything you like. Calico's a perfect one, to be fair. Most of us have got that in our stash. Doesn't have to be particularly pretty if you don't want it to be, but it can be whatever you want to be. Now, if you are looking at adding some sort of embroidery on the back, maybe like a quilt label, or if it's a gift for somebody and you want to commemorate, I don't know, their first Christmas or whatever the occasion, and you're going to embroider something on the back, it's a good idea to do it now. Just be a little bit mindful as to where you're going to put that embroidery though, because what's going to happen is once we've stitched this in place, and I'll just place it at the back for now, once it's kind of stitched around the parameter, you are going to do a bit of stitch in the ditch if you want to. You don't have to. I think it's a good idea though, because it kind of puts the front, stitches the front to the back, and if you've got anything that's quite weighty, it could be quite loose and baggy. So I always think it's a good idea to do either stitch in the ditch there, or you can just do a horizontal stitch wherever you choose. It's your advent calendar, you decide. Now, if you are going to be doing any embroidery, then you don't really want your stitches from your stitch in the ditch to go straight through your pretty embroidery. So just be mindful of where that's going to sit on your project. Obviously it's going to be on the outside anyway. So yeah, just be mindful. You've got a reasonable gap between those, so you should be able to fit it in somehow. The other way you can do it is make it all up and then just hand applique it just onto the backing afterwards. But personally, I would probably embroider it, just keep it within the sizes of the strips, so to speak, bottom one, top one. It's entirely up to you. So when it comes to backing, you've got the dimensions on the panel, but as is always the case, our sewing doesn't always come exactly to the dimensions that the pattern or the guidelines give you. So I always kind of add a little bit extra on the outside, the outside edges, top and bottom as well, just to accommodate for that. So I've got the selvage edge there, so I'm just going to take that beyond. In fact, let me flip it over because we can see exactly where we're placing it then. So make sure your calico is sitting nice and flat, so you've got no crinkles in it. Do it on the floor, or if you've got more space on your cutting table, you can do. And then what I tend to do is I tend to stitch the top, the side, and then the bottom. So I don't do it in a continual run. Personal choice. You might be going, oh gosh, that's terrible, how can she ever do that? Because I can. That's how I choose to do it. You do you, and I'll do me, or whatever the phrase is. But all I'm going to do is pop some pins in there away from that edge. And also by doing them separately, it means that I can ensure that the fabric, the backing is flat, because sometimes it can kind of bunch up a little bit if you've got your eye on too many things. So by keeping it simple and doing the top, then doing the side, I'm looking at each one separately. Now the only thing that you need to remember is when it comes to one of the edges, and I tend to make it the bottom because I tend to think that you don't notice it so much at the bottom, you're going to need to leave a turning gap. So I would tend to leave it probably, I think it says about 8 inches in the instructions. You can kind of see where your pockets are, so that's 10 inches. So around there, leave a gap, stitch one side, stitch the other, and then we'll turn it through, and then you'll top stitch that turn in, and then that way you aren't doing any hand sewing. If you want to hand sew it, you can do. I don't do a lot of hand sewing, so I will turn mine through and just top stitch it if I feel like that when I get to it. So all I'm going to do is go and take this. I can see where my edge of my advent calendar is. So that's where I'm going to take my selvage from. So I'm going to sew a centimetre in, and I'm going to go right from the one edge right the way across to the other. Okay, so I have stitched around the edge. I've chopped off the little corners as well, because that's going to help with turning through. And then what I've done at the bottom, where we've got the turning hole in the seam, I folded back the seam allowance and pressed it on both sides. Now obviously there's a lot of fabric on the quilted side because you've got your wadding and your stabilizer and pockets and your 2 layers from the dowel sleeve. So there's a lot of bulk there, but it helps a little bit when it comes to do the top stitch later on, or if you want to do the hand stitching. So then you basically turn it inside out. So pull it through, and with a bit of luck you've caught all the side seams and you've got no gaps, which of course we're going to check all of that before we stitch up the hole in the bottom. But we'll have a look at that just a second. No pins. Obviously make sure your pins are out before you start turning, because otherwise that can be a bit of a nasty surprise when you're working your way through. And just if you do have something like a turner, or to be honest, your fingers aren't too bad to get in those corners. But if you do want to use something, you can do. Just make sure that you're not using anything too pointed like your scissors, because you do not want to go through your fabric. So yeah, wooden turner, or some sort of burnisher or something like that will do, but good old fingers and thumbs are working on this occasion. So there we go. So that's the dowel sleeve turned through. Then we've got all the panels, which obviously I'll give it a press before I start stitching everything in place, and top stitching. You don't have to top stitch it if you don't want to, but I would suggest you do that quilting along there. The only bit that you might want to consider top stitching is the bottom where you're doing the turn, but you might want to hand stitch it in. But either way, if you're hand stitching it, then great. It might be easier to hand stitch, to be fair, because then you haven't got to worry about the lining up. But basically from the underside you're just going to catch that in to make sure it's nice and neat. It's already stitched that binding, so because we did the sewing earlier on, not the binding, the sleeve is already attached. So it's just a case of that if you do want to top stitch it, then just pin that in place and then almost do a stitch in the ditch across that bottom edge there. But by doing it by hand, I suppose you can kind of get exactly where you want those stitches to go. So just put a couple of pins in there just to hold it just for the time being. So all I need to do now is give it a press. Make sure everything's caught up at the sides then, we haven't got any gaps, and then all I'm going to do is come back, just check on the back, make sure that looks all okay. Yeah, it's looking good, so I'll give that a press in a second, and then all I'm going to do is go along each of the rows, stitch in the ditch, so basically where the backing or where the pocket fabric meets with the next row down. I'm just going to stitch along there in the ditch, and then that will mean that it's stitched all to the back and it just gives it that extra little bit of stability. The rod itself, which I've lost, there we go, the rod itself will pass through, and then all you need to do is tie some ribbon to it to mean that you can hang it wherever you want to hang it. And then obviously you've got all the pockets there ready for you to fill with whatever goodies you like. A few little ideas that I've got in my goodie bag. So it might be that on the last day, the 24th, you're going to put something quite substantial in there. It might be that you have a particular day when you put your Christmas tree up, so you could potentially just start putting your decorations in for that particular day. Or it could be that it turns into almost like a tree decorating thing. You don't have to fill them with expensive things. So yeah, sometimes it's about memories, isn't it? So for instance, it might be that in one of the days you've got an activity that you're going to do with the kids. So there you go, maybe on, I don't know, the 11th, we're going to make some Christmas cupcakes. So you can pop that in there. I picked these up from our local supermarket as well. Sainsbury's, other supermarkets are available. Whether they sell these or not, I don't know, but these are jokes that you can pop in, so just randomly pop them in like so, and then you've got an extra little bit of a surprise in those as you go. It might be that you are going to put little gift bags in there, so as I say, draw up the gift bag and just put that in there, and you won't know the contents yourself either, which is a nice little idea. And then when it comes to actually adding the top piece, it could be just a little bit of satin ribbon, It could be, oops, trying to hold on to that so it doesn't slide off the table now. It could be some baker's twine or whatever you choose it to be. Sparkly thread, whatever you've got in your stash. So hopefully it will be an advent calendar that you get to use every year for many years to come. And yeah, enjoy the process as much as the contents and of course Christmas itself. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that. Like and subscribe if you choose, always helps, because if I do any videos or tutorials, then they do end up on my YouTube channel, so it's a good way to keep in touch with what else we're making. So yeah, leave it with you. Enjoy.